So the Shiur today, I don't know if that made it on mute either. The Shiur today is sponsored Leilu Nishmas Beila Bes Rabbi Yaakov Aryeh, whose yahrzeit is Beis Elul, Shavalias Neshama, be a good to better for for her whole family and all of Klal Yisrael. Amen. Okay, so we are now Tanya chapter 4. And so we spoke in chapter 3, we spoke about the makeup of the two souls. And the souls are made up of the three intellectual components, the seven emotional components, and how the godly soul and the animal soul sort of mirror one another. They're both made up of the same intellectual and emotional components. The godly soul's components are obviously utilized for godly purposes, and the animal soul's components of intellect and emotion are utilized for egocentric, selfish, or self-centered purposes. Okay, so now we go to chapter 4, and here the Alter Rebbe is going to describe how does the soul actually manifest itself? How does the soul actually express itself? So we know we have this soul, this chelek elokah mimal, this portion of Hashem, which is the godly soul, and then the animal soul, which is a combination and made up of godly energy, but also the klippas that cover over and conceal the godly energy. Each one of these souls has a desire, and that desire is to express itself, to manifest itself. The animal soul yearns to manifest itself, and how it primarily does is through motivating the person towards selfishness. Again, not necessarily even negativity, just like your regular average everyday animal, the animal is egocentric. The animal's main priority and main motivating factors are itself and all the things that it needs, wants, desires, etc. It's not negative, it's just self-oriented. So the animal soul in the human being works the same way. It is self-oriented. So it wants to manifest itself by empowering the person to engage in activities that feel good. These could be selfish, self-indulgent activities, or they could be positive activities as well. After all, many of us feel good when we do a chesed for other people, etc. That's part of our nature. That's also part of our animal soul. Our godly soul, on the other hand, wants to manifest itself and inspire the person to engage in transcendence of self, to engage in what your ultimate purpose is, to live for something beyond yourself, to live in order to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to fulfill Hashem's desires and wills in the world. So they each have different and in many ways opposing directions in which they are pulling the human being. Now, here's the thing. They can't share the steering wheel. So at any given moment in time, one of them is in control and the other lies dormant. And so there's a constant tension in the Jew, which one is going to be in control. So the way that the neshama, the either neshama manifests itself is through what the Alter Rebbe calls the garments, because it enclothes itself. The energy of that soul enclothes itself in one of three quote unquote garments. And the reason why they're called garments is because just like we enclothe ourselves in our own garments, and those garments project to the outside world who we are, the garments of thought, speech, and action do exactly the same thing. So the energy of, let's say, the godly soul, when the godly soul wants to manifest itself, it will enclothe itself in either the thoughts, speech, and action of Tariag mitzvahs, of one of the mitzvahs. In other words, it manifests itself and encloses itself in something that pulls the person towards something that which is beyond or outside of him or herself, fulfilling the mitzvahs, learning Torah, transcending self, fulfilling purpose. The animal soul wants to manifest itself through activities that please the person physically, that feel good to the person, whatever it may be, eating, drinking, sleeping, etc. Whatever self-indulgent activities. Now, again, those activities could be mitzvahs as well, but it depends what our mindset is. So there's a constant tension. Who's going to control my thoughts? Who's going to control my speech? Who's going to control my actions? Because each one of these souls is yearning to be in control, is yearning to manifest themselves. And again, they can't share the steering wheel because they're pulling in opposite directions. One's pulling towards transcendence and one's pulling towards self-orientation. So the Alter Rebbe is now describing in chapter 4 these garments and how the soul expresses itself. Now, again, I just want to zoom out because it's very easy to get lost in the trees and zoom out and see the forest. The entire purpose of the 53 chapters of Tanya is really ultimately behavior control. In other words, how do we consistently put ourselves in a position where our godly soul is the soul that is manifesting itself, is the soul that is expressing itself through my thought, speech, and action? Because the entire point of the 53 chapters of Tanya is, how do I control my thought, speech, and action? How do I ensure that my thoughts, my speech, and my actions, very simple, those three things, that's it, that's all we have to control. How do I ensure that those are always directed towards godliness, towards transcendence, towards my purpose? And that really is the Beinoni. That is going to be the Alter Rebbe's definition of the Beinoni. It's not spiritual perfection. I still may struggle internally. I may still have very ugly cravings. I may still deal with internal anger and jealousy and taivas or whatever it may be, but they're internal. I don't allow them to be manifest. I don't allow them to express themselves outwardly. I actually am able to consistently control my thought, speech, and action. That's the Beinoni. That's the ultimate goal. From all of the meditative work and all of the efforts and all of the 53 chapters of Tanya, the real goal is behavior control. And that is obviously, as we all know, having lived life, that is as easier said than done. So the question is, how do I do this? How do I ensure that my godly soul is the soul that is always expressing itself, and my animal soul is the soul that lies dormant? And it's difficult because for the vast majority of us, our default setting, sort of how we're pre-programmed, for most of us, how we're pre-programmed is our animal soul is the one that's in control. Our godly soul isn't fully matured and isn't fully invested, and I don't have full access to all of its powers until the bar bas mitzvah. So the animal soul has a whole 12 or 13 years head start on the person. So and that's why children are just intrinsically self-oriented. It's animal soul energy, which is not negative. That's exactly how Hashem created them. Yes.
So just about the three garments, so thought, speech, and action. I'm just surprised that thought is categorized the same as speech and action.
Excellent point. Excellent point. So let me just say here because then everybody could pick up the mic. So Rachel has a very good question. I'm absolutely in control of my speech, right? Even though sometimes I may not feel that way. I'm absolutely in control of my actions. So I understand when I talk about speech and actions, but I'm not always in control. I'm not in control of what I think always. The ideas just pop into my. Is that what you were saying? Yeah. So how could thoughts be in the same category as speech and actions? Thoughts seem to be something that's not always in our control. That's an excellent, excellent question. And the Alter Rebbe actually is going to address this question. And how the Alter Rebbe addresses it is very, very practical. Because there are two types of thoughts. There are two levels of thoughts. So to a certain extent, Rachel is exactly correct. The thoughts that pop up into my mind, I am not in control of. What pops into my head. It's like whenever I teach this, I always give the example of, although it's maybe becoming less and less practical, of sometimes you go onto an internet page and you get an ad that pops up. You didn't want that ad. That's not the ad that you didn't scroll to that, but the ad, that's how the internet page makes money. They have pop-up ads, and hopefully you'll be attracted by the ad. So now, once that you were not in control of that and you didn't desire, you went to a certain web page to see a certain content, and all of a sudden an ad pops up. Um, there's one of two things that you could do with that ad. You could either click it off, you could exit out, or you could click on it. You could dwell upon it. You could look at it. You could really reflect upon it, and hopefully, and they'll make the sale, and that's exactly what they want. So the same thing with our thoughts. We're not responsible for what pops into our heads. What we're responsible for is what we do after it pops into our heads. We either shut it down, click it off, and direct our minds to a different direction, which we have absolute control of. Mm-hmm. Again, but it's like speech. Sometimes we don't feel like we have that control, but we do. Or we could dwell upon those thoughts and think about them. And so you're right to a certain extent that the thoughts that pop up into my mind are not in this category. But what I do after they pop into my mind is 100% in my control, and that is in this category. So that's an excellent, excellent point. Thank you. Okay. So now the Alter Rebbe is going to talk now in chapter 4 about these garments and the power of that these garments have. And on one hand, we're on page 15 on the bottom, page Ches on the top. On one hand, garments is a very apt term because the soul encloses itself into my thoughts, into my speech, and into my actions. On the other hand, the Alter was going to say it's not exactly a good exact term because garments are sort of secondary to us, right? Garments are not part of our essence, and we would never think that the garment is greater or holier or higher or loftier than a human being. But the garments of the godly soul are the thought, speech, and action of Taryag mitzvahs. And as we learned in chapter 1, Hashem and his Torah are one. So when I'm enclothing myself in thoughts of Torah, in speech of Torah, in actions of mitzvahs, I'm not just enclothing myself in sort of this lower secondary garment. I'm literally enclothing myself in Hashem, in the Ein Sof, because he and his Torah are one. So these garments have incredible power and effect on me. So therefore, like, again, it's not exactly like a physical garment because a physical garment I put on, I take off. It doesn't really affect me. It doesn't elevate me. It doesn't, it could change my mindset to a certain extent, but it doesn't have this profound, deep, penetrating effect on me. But the garments of Torah absolutely do. The more I enclothe myself in those garments, the more refined I become, the better, the more connected I become, the more my relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu is expressed. So the garments themselves. So when we use the term garments, I just want you to keep that in mind, that we're not talking about some sort of secondary level of like our physical garments are to us. But these garments are, in fact, incredibly powerful, life-changing experiences every time I do this. So this is really the question of Tanya, is how do I get to a place where my thoughts, speech, and action are constantly being enclosed in godly garments as opposed to animal soul garments, selfish, self-indulgent, egocentric garments of thought, speech, and action. And again, because what renders it most difficult is that our default setting is egocentrism, selfishness. That's how we're created. And again, I just, we're created that way for a reason. If we didn't have ego and we didn't have selfishness, we wouldn't accomplish everything that we're meant to accomplish as well. It just has to be channeled in the right, like everything has to be channeled to the right, to the right energy and to the right purpose. My ego is a very powerful force within me. It's not all negative. It has to be channeled positively, like many things, like the areas in life that are most difficult to channel towards godliness are in fact the most powerful godly energies we have. The act of eating is a perfect example. The act of eating could be selfish, self-indulgent, or it could be godly. It could be incredibly godly. It all depends upon our mindset. So it's very easy to engage in the act of eating indulgently because it tastes good and it feels good. And that is our animalistic energy coming out and manifesting itself. And it's very easy to just succumb to that, to only eat the things that feel good, taste good, etc. And during the act of eating, enjoy the physicality of it, which again, there's no problem in that. But if that is the sole element of my act of eating, then the act of eating is no different than when my animal eats. My animal eats also because it's self-indulgent and it feels good and it tastes good. Now, it's not that I'm not meant to enjoy the taste of the food. I am. Hashem created it with the taste and the flavors and the scents, etc., so that I'm meant to enjoy it. But I'm meant to channel the experience. Why am I eating? And that's the idea of the bracha before and the bracha after. The bracha before is not just meant to be mumbled davened through, like we often do. I put it in my mouth. The bracha before is meant to be a meditation for me to reflect on what it is I'm about to do, the energy that I'm about to release. And then the bracha achrena is exactly the same thing. What did I just do? It transforms the act of eating from an animalistic act to something that is godly. But again, that's hard to do. Yeah.
I wanted to say, like, I was on a cruise last week and I was looking at people around me and I would see a lot of non-Jews. And I thought for me, this was like so beautiful because I would see some of them literally before they ate it. They would go to the buffet, get their food. And whether it was, and I would see it randomly, like everywhere, whether it was a couple, a husband and a wife sitting together or a family with their children, they would hold hands. Well, there was the rush of, people coming and going and, shoving yourself a little to try and get the food. And they would stop. And they would do like prayers, not for like a second, but literally for a few minutes.
Wow.
To thank God. I even took pictures. I was like, I have to take like
we're doing this.
a bunch of people. And I was like, wow.
Yeah, I was going to say, what kind of cruise did you go on?
No, Rabbi, I think,
Yeah.
look, I'll be honest with you. I'm seeing that like when I went to see my son in the military, all the families were stopping and holding hands before they were eating and thanking God. So I was saying, like, we have this in the Jewish religion. It's kind of,
That's right.
it's built. But I'm seeing, like, when you look at the 7 laws of Noah, right, which
Yeah.
is what they should respect, is that part of that? Because, and for me, this is it's such a truthful act. That's the connection. It's
Beautiful.
intention that you're putting
Beautiful.
in the food.
It's beautiful.
Whether you're Jew or non-Jew or anybody.
It's beautiful. Listen, that's the idea. It takes the act of eating from the act, an animalistic act,
Right.
to a godly act. And again, that is hard to do when it comes to food. That is really hard to do. And it's the same thing with intimacy. Intimacy is the exact same thing. It could be a very animalistic, selfish, self-indulgent act, or it could be the most godly act that we can actually engage in. Like an ego, I would say eating, intimacy, and ego, probably the 3 main forces within the human being. that are the most difficult to channel have the capacity for the greatest holiness. And so, but this is the question: how do we get there where we can consistently channel ourselves, our thoughts, speech, and action towards these godly garments? Okay. So let's back up a little bit, because first we have to describe what these garments are, and this is what the Alter Rebbe is doing now in chapter 4. So chapter 4, again, these are the building blocks of knowledge. How we control our garments, we're not even getting into yet. The Alter Rebbe is just giving us the building blocks of that these garments exist. Okay. I just jumped ahead a little bit to put them in place of the map of Tanya. Okay, so chapter 4, Perek Dal, Va'od yesh l'kol nefesh elokish shleisha levushim. For every godly soul and every animal soul as well, there are 3 garments, through which the soul manifests itself, communicates, so to speak. Shehem machshava, dibur, v'maisa. These are thoughts, speech, and action. And these garments are not all on the same level. That's actually from kavod to kal, from the highest to the lowest. Thoughts is the most refined level of garment. It's the garment that's closest to the soul. It's why our thoughts are so incredibly powerful and profound. Our thoughts, the thoughts of human beings, we think our thoughts just exist in our head, and our thoughts don't have any power, but we know in Judaism, and we've been taught this by our great sages, our thoughts have incredible power. When our soul energy encloses itself in the garment of thought, that garment is very refined and close to the soul, and it is now expressing the soul, and the soul is connected on high. So the thought doesn't just exist in the isolation of my mind. That thought creates an energy, because your soul is an energy, and that energy exudes beyond me. So my thoughts have the power to change reality. That's how powerful they are. I've said this before, but I always tell people who are struggling with their children, what can I do? What can I do? And sometimes there's nothing we can do except think positively about that child. Your positive thoughts have incredible power. We don't realize how powerful our thoughts are. If we did realize how powerful our thoughts are, it would be life-changing. And this is why, because our thoughts are a very refined garment, and ultimately express the energy of the soul, which is connected on high. Dibur is the same thing. Dibur is a little bit lesser than thoughts, but again, our speech, we know, and we've spoken about this many times in a Parsha Shiur and Tanya Shiur, our speech creates reality. It's why Lashon Hara is such spoken about with such a, heavy terms, and going, having nothing to do with mysticism, going to the Chazal. It's akin to murder, idolatry, adultery, etc. How could speech be connected to all 3 of those terrible things? Speech is incredibly powerful. When we speak words, we create an energy. And that energy now exists beyond me, outside of me. It's an energy I can't even take back to a certain extent. Once something is spoken, I can't take that back. I could apologize for it. I could try to rectify it, but you can't take it back. It's just what the Chafetz Chaim said. It's why Lashon Hara is so severe. Because it creates an energy, and it creates a reality that's very difficult to take back. And then ultimately Maisa, which is the lowest garments. There are actions, which we think our actions are the highest level. Our actions are actually the lowest garment. Our thoughts and our again, Maisa Hua Ikar, and everything ultimately boils down to how we behave and what our actions are. But we should not sleep upon how powerful our thoughts and our speech are as well. These are ways that the soul expresses themselves, and that soul has tremendous energy, whether it's the godly soul or the animal soul, that creates an energy. So every thought that we think creates an energy. Every word that we speak creates an energy. If we were more in tune with it, if we could actually feel the energy or see the energy or experience the energy, we would be way more sensitive to it, but it would also skew our bechira, it would skew our free choice. But it's important to at least intellectually understand the incredible power and energy that our thoughts and speech and actions ultimately create. So when every time I think, every thought that I choose to dwell on, not my pop-ups, but every thought that I choose to dwell on creates an energy. And that energy manifests itself in the world and comes back to me, comes back to my children, comes back to my children. Every word that I speak has the exact same effect. I'm creating an energy that now reverberates into the world. So when
Is it more of a soul thing because of the inverted triangle?
Yeah.
Why is our thought more soul related than the other two garments?
It's just because it's closer to the soul. It's more refined. So it empowers that it is empowered by the soul, and it is so refined that it enables the soul's powers to express itself even more powerfully than the other two. So as the garments become more coarsened, they sort of cover over that soul energy. So speech is a little bit more coarsened and action is a little bit more coarsened, but
more external, like
more external, yeah. But all of them express the energy.
You see this?
Intellect and emotion, not necessarily thought, intellect, the power to, again, conceive, the power to the cognition, etc. The intellect are soul powers. The thoughts are how those powers then manifest themselves. Okay, but we should just realize that before moving on.
It's actually such an important distinction, though.
Yeah.
Small detail.
Every thought, I think, every word that I speak, every action that I take ultimately exists eternally. It's a scary thought to a certain extent, but it's also a very powerful thought. And this is why, even though we Jews oftentimes, I find that we Jews have often, again, I'm going to paint with a broad brush, but we oftentimes have a hard time with optimism. Many of us, right? Many of us all of a sudden go to, as soon as there's a problem, we all of a sudden go to the worst possible place, right? And it's a very Jewish thing, and it has to do with our, I think our genetic trauma that, of course it's always going to turn out bad, because it always has turned out bad, but that's really not true. And it's important for us to really work, especially if we're pessimistic by nature, which many of us are, I have found in the tribe of the Jewish people, for whatever reason. We have a lot of anxiety and we worry, and the famous thing about the Jewish mother who's always worried. And looking if my mother's on here right now, but she's actually not. But my mother personifies that. I see some of my wife. If my mother's not worried about something, she's not happy. That's her energy, is to worry. But that is, as Jews, we are often like that. But it's important for us to realize and really try to redirect ourselves to be optimistic and to think positively about the future, about ourselves, about our relationships, about our children, et cetera, and realize and recognize the power that those thoughts have. We don't often think in those terms, but that's incredibly important. Okay. So let's just jump back in over here. So these are the garments. This is how the soul expresses itself. The godly soul he's talking about now, through thought, speech, and action of the mitzvahs. When a person actually, with his actions, engages in a mitzvah, or engages in an act of kindness, engages in an act of love that is transcendent to his own self-indulgence, that is transcendent to his own needs, so to speak. Or bedibur who asik bepei befeirish kol tariag mitzvahs v'hilchei sayin. Or he's engaged in speaking about words of Torah, giving a devar Torah, speaking words of Torah, speaking words of inspiration. explaining words of Torah, etc. Arba machshava, our thinking, shumasik kol masha efshel lahasik b'pardes haTorah, are when one thinks about Torah, when one comprehends or is trying to learn, and one thinks, or one just thinks about the parsha, or thinks about Tanya, or thinks about a Mishnah, whatever it may be. And those moments when you are acting, speaking, thinking words of Torah, Hari Kaileles Tariyage Vari Nafshoy, then all 613 limbs of the soul are Melubashim B'Tariyage Mitzvahs Torah. Your soul is enclosed in that energy of Torah. Your soul is enclosed in the garments of Torah, whether you're thinking words of Torah, you're speaking words of Torah, you're acting words of Torah. Uva pratis, and if I go into more detail, says the Alter Rebbe, to give this more detail, bechinas chabad shebenafshoy, your intellectual powers, your power of conception of an idea, your power of cognition, your power of connecting to those ideas. That's the chabad. That all of those intellectual powers are enclosed. He says, in these garments, bechinas chabad shebenafshoy melubeshes ba'asagas haTorah shehu masig b'pardes kafi yachaltas hasagasai. So when you are understanding a piece of Torah, what we're doing right now, when we're learning a chapter of Tanya, and the rabbi's explaining it, and I am understanding it. What is happening? We don't realize the incredible spiritual phenomena that we are experiencing right at this moment. The Chabad, my intellectual powers or faculties of my soul are right now in this moment being enclosed in the garments of Hashem's Torah, which he and his Torah are one. V'shorish nafshoy milamayla. And so what happens is that the garments of the faculties of my soul are being surrounded and enveloped by godliness, by these godly garments. And this has a very profound, powerful effect on the soul. This is what the soul ultimately desires. It's tremendously elevating to the soul. That for the soul to be able to manifest itself and enclose itself in godliness and connect itself to godliness, as opposed to selfishness of the animal soul. V'hamidais, and similarly, that's when I'm understanding words of Torah, or speaking words of Torah. V'hamidais, and when I express when my desire, the love of my godly soul, or the awe, the yira of my godly soul, they're expressed through fulfilling the midas. Fulfilling the mitzvahs, I'm sorry. And so the midas of Yiras Hashem, which is Gevurah, are Avas Hashem, which is Chesed, and all of their branches. V'todai say it, melubashes b'kiyuma mitzvahs b'maisa b'dibrshu talmud Torah k'neged kulam. When I am fulfilling one of the positive commandments, I'm lighting Shabbos candles, I'm giving tzedakah, I'm putting on tefillin, I'm davening, whatever it may be. That is the element of love of Hashem, of Ava, of my godly soul, actually enclothing itself in this garment of action, in the mitzvah itself. Because what is compelling the mitzvah? Hopefully, it's the love, it's Avas Hashem. And similarly with a losase, when I am Makayim a losase with kavana, I don't engage in a certain behavior. And I'm doing that with kavana out of Yiras Hashem. That is the yira enclothing itself in the garments of godliness. So when I am engaged in a mitzvah, my soul is enclosed, the emotional attributes of my soul are enclosed in the godliness of that mitzvah, in the garments of those mitzvahs. And that's what the soul yearns for. That's all the soul desires. Is not to just exist in the ivory tower of our minds and our hearts, but to manifest itself and express itself by enclothing itself in the action or in the speech of Torah or in thoughts of Torah. So, ki ha'ava hi shorish karamach mitzvahs, the love of Hashem is what compels the mitzvah, the positive commandments. And so therefore, when I am fulfilling a positive commandment, that love that exists in my soul is manifesting itself and enclothing itself in that mitzvah. And that's the soul's ultimate yearning and purpose. That's what the soul desires. That's what the soul yearns for. Umimena heinim shachas. It is from that ava that all the mitzvahs that I do are ultimately inspired by. Ubalada, and without that ava, I can still fulfill the mitzvahs, but ein lehem kiyum amiti, but I'm not fulfilling them in their truest form. The truest form of fulfilling the mitzvahs is not just to do a robotic act out of guilt, but to do it out of a sense of love and connection to the divine. That's kiyum amiti. That's the true way to fulfill the mitzvahs. Ki hamakaiman ba'emes, because one who fulfills the mitzvahs truthfully as they're meant to be fulfilled, who oyeves Hashem. It's coming because he loves Hashem. He or she loves Hashem, and it's an expression of that love. When you love somebody, you want to transcend your own selfishness and do for them. Right? You want to give to them what they want, what they desire, what they yearn for. Not just what you yearn for. What kind of relationship is, if the whole relationship is, what can you do for me so that I can have what I want? That's not a relationship. But oftentimes that's a relationship we have with Hashem. But the idea is not what Hashem can do for me, and I'm doing these mitzvahs so that Hashem can do for me. No. I'm doing these mitzvahs because I know this is what Hashem wants. And out of my love for Hashem, I want to do what he wants. That's the soul truly expressing itself, truly expressing its innate love. And when you love somebody, you want to embrace them. You want to be with them. You want to connect to them. You want to hold them. How do we connect and hold Hashem? Through the mitzvahs. Right? The mitzvahs is our connection to Hashem. The word mitzvah, tzavsa, doesn't only mean commandment, but it comes from the Aramaic tzavsa, which means connection. The mitzvah is literally a connection. Every mitzvah is me connecting to the divine. This is oftentimes we don't explain this or express this to our children. We tell them what they have to do. I say this all the time. Like the schools teach our children, are very good at teaching our children what they have to do, how they have to do it. But why are we doing it? But this is what we are fulfilling the ultimate desire of our soul. It's the greatest sort of self-fulfillment. This is what your most internal self ultimately desires. Connection to the divine. That connection is forged through the mitzvahs. The mitzvahs are paths of connection. In other words, we are finite human beings. And Hashem, by definition, is infinite. Normally, there is no bridge. There is no connection between the finite and the infinite. They're polar opposites, by definition. And that's the power and profundity of mitzvahs. They're the bridge between the infinite and the finite. The mitzvahs are our connection. And this is what the godly soul yearns for, to manifest itself and express that connection. And when it does, that's the ava. It is being motivated by ava. The because the reality is it's impossible to traverse that bridge between the infinite and the finite. It's impossible to connect to Hashem be'emes, ki'im b'kiyum ramach bikudim. With the only way, there's only one bridge that gets us from finite to infinite. There's only one bridge, and that bridge is the mitzvahs. Shehem ramache varim demalka, because each one of these mitzvahs correspond to a limb of the king, so to speak. Kaviyachal. In other words, Hashem created those bridges. So why do my Shabbos candles have to be lit at an exact time, at a certain time, etc., and they can't be lit too much before or too much after? Because Hashem created the bridge, and so he defines the bridge. Why are my tefillin square and not round? Why are they black and not purple? Because again, Hashem defines the bridge and creates the bridge. And so each one of those mitzvahs, when they're done in accordance with the ratzon of Hashem, give us that bridge to connect ourselves to the infinite. That's what the soul yearns for. So when I fulfill that mitzvah and I do it out of that yearning, out of not just out of guilt or robotic action, but out of a sense of love, out of a sense of connection. Again, it doesn't even have to be this lofty, transcendent meditation, just the feeling of I'm doing this because I love Hashem, because I want to connect. That is the soul truly manifesting itself. That's the soul expressing itself in the garment of action. That's the godly soul now being in control. So at that moment, if I could, I am so far over time, I did not even realize it. Wow. Okay. I started late. Okay, so I'm going to conclude right here. If I could freeze that moment in time, at that moment where I'm doing a mitzvah, let's say, or right now where we're all learning Tanya, right now in this moment of time, my godly soul is dominant and my animal soul is dormant. I right now in this moment, all of us in this table and all of us listening to the shiur, whether online or whether here on Zoom, all of us are in a Beinoni moment right now. The Tanya is going to teach us to do is string together more and more Beinoni moments where even when I'm walking down the street, even when I'm shopping in the store, even when I'm conversing with my spouse, even when I'm living in my mundane moments, I can keep that godly soul at the forefront and my animal soul lying dormant. That's the Beinoni. That's ultimately we are in control and not our animalistic instincts are in control. We are in control of them. They are not in control of us. Okay. Amir, we'll stop here. Mitzvah, we will continue chapter 4 next week. Amir Hashem. Thank you so much for joining, everybody. Wonderful to be back. And we will see everybody next week. Take care.